So I think the way this little talk is going to go is we're going to start with kind of just recounting uh, my story, educationally speaking, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what worked, what didn't work, and how the lessons learned from my education can be applied to gifted learning throughout the world. Okay, so you want to begin?
You got it.
All right.
Well, you can begin by thanking everybody.
Oh yes, and thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
This was such an honor to be invited, and we want to thank Daria and your organization for doing this, for having this platform. I think that's the most important thing for families is the support and creating a community where you can get this type of education. So thank you so much for the hard work that you're doing because you're reaching families with information that's going to change individuals' lives and families' lives.
And just for the record, this is my first ever conference or time speaking pretty much anywhere outside the US or to anyone outside the US. So it's really great to see, you know, resources like this are around the globe. Okay. Um, so to begin, I was diagnosed with autism at the age of 4 years old. Uh, and then at the age of 10 years old, I was diagnosed, or rather, identified as a gifted student. And so there's a bit of an age discrepancy there, because for a long time, my teachers and such thought that, you know, if you were diagnosed as autistic, why is she out of focus?
I know. I think you have your,
I'm not blurring my background. My computer camera's just like this.
uh-oh, unless I sat on your lap, I guess. Well, no, let's go this way so it's not on your bed. There you go. Sorry about that technical difficulty.
All right, I guess mom's just going to be out of focus
I
for
think
this
I'm out
one.
of focus. Yeah.
Uh, so I was diagnosed as autistic at the age of 4 and then identified as gifted at the age of 10. There's a discrepancy in those ages there because that a lot of my teachers and the people responsible for diagnosing these sorts of things didn't know that you could be gifted and autistic. Uh,
Yeah, that's a very important part for families and for educators. Jordan is both autistic and gifted. So a lot of times in families, you might be identified as gifted first and then autistic later at different, it could be any age. In America, a lot of times children are identified around age 4. That seems to be pretty common because parents seem to notice that there's some difficulties with the developmental parts of their lives and they, seek seeing physicians possibly. This can also happen with the gifted population and it can be misdiagnosed as something where the child's demonstrating different behaviors. Jordan had different behaviors. I did not know that some of his behaviors were gifted profile behaviors. So when I did take him to the doctor, I was focused more on what, teachers and people were saying, or, you'd be at the park and another parent might come up to you or someone might say that his behavior wasn't, what they call normal, but now we're looking at what is normal behavior or normal development. But some of the behaviors that he was showing were actually gifted profiles behaviors. So it's really important when you're a parent and you're going to educators or talking to physicians that you talk to people that really understand the gifted profile because your child might be demonstrating something that could look like it's ADHD or auditory processing or autism, but it's actually more of a gifted behavior. So it's important to get that diagnosis as young as you can. And then once you know it's that label, unfortunately, whether it's gifted or whether it's autism and gifted and or dysgraphia, which Jordan also had, you can then find the correct interventions and do them as early as possible. And we were fortunate enough to also do physical gym type, activities, and that really helped for having the autism and the gifted. But he's going to continue and talk about the gifted journey.
Yeah. So throughout my education, then there's kind of this running theme of not misdiagnosis per se, but just lack of diagnosis. Because a lot of these things can be very hard to spot, especially in the classroom, especially for teachers who, may or may not be experts in this sort of thing. But anyway, elementary, kindergarten, uh, for all these times I was kind of suffering a little bit in the classroom. My needs were not being met for a lot of it uh, until, in part because I absolutely despised handwriting. I just couldn't do it. If it was a write a page about this or that, I wouldn't do it. If it was, here's a math sheet and show your work, I wouldn't do it, and so on. Um,
It was painful.
Yeah, because it was painful. Dysgraphia, for those who don't know, is a condition uh, that makes handwriting painful for me. And so as a child, I just wouldn't do assignments that required too much handwriting. Um, or at least I would resent doing them.
So in that early stage of education here in the US, um, they're teaching a one size fits all. It was in a public school. And so they were really determining how bright the child was by how their writing output was. And with Jordan, he didn't have any writing output really. So that keyed into them thinking, oh, he's autistic and he should be at the back of the class or not someone that we should focus on. And that was his early that was his early education and the way he was treated in that setting, which of course sets up a very different psychological feeling about school and about your self-worth and about what you can do. And you can very easily just not care. It can really create an unhappy environment. And I know the last speaker that was speaking was talking about creating that happy environment and that creates happy kids. It's so true. But you need to have educators that are educated on how to educate gifted individuals or gifted students. You also have to have an environment. You have to have, I think, a relationship with the individual, whether it's in with the teacher or a mentor or a family that's really supporting their unique growth. Because with a gifted profile, the child is interested in certain things, not unlike it could be with autism, and you want to really support their interest because that's their strength usually, not, or create, follow their strengths also. And I do think that it starts, I'm not an educator, I'm not a therapist, I'm just a mom. But I know in our situation, and look, we still have a good relationship. The importance is having that relationship with that child and following their lead. So even as an early age, Jordan did some extraordinary things. And I kept thinking, this is not someone that's just in their minds autistic. This is someone that's really thinking outside the box and coming up with some very interesting and innovative ways to look at the world. And so my take was, oh, he's an inventor. And that's what I kind of referred to him at when he would do these things that were kind of very extraordinary in my mind. I would say, oh, you're such an inventor. And I would give him that positive feedback that he wasn't necessarily getting in that school environment in those early, what is called elementary school years. And that would be ages probably 5 to, I think, 10.
Yeah, and a point I want to stress here, by the way, is that diagnosing these things can be very difficult for teachers. Like, how is a teacher in, second grade supposed to know that a student can't write because their hand hurts, as opposed to just really doesn't want to write because they don't like writing or doesn't have anything to write, uh, because they weren't paying attention or something. So, diagnosing a condition, especially like dysgraphia, can be extremely difficult. Um, but I would say the first major hint to teachers that maybe there was something else going on here came in the third grade when I transitioned to uh, a school that provided laptops for writing, uh, that where my performance markedly improved. And in fourth grade, um, when I wound up for it's essentially to get out of an assignment, I wound up writing an entire book over the course of the school year. Uh, so clearly the problem wasn't with my aptitude internally for writing. It was with my ability to do the writing. Um,
I,
I,
I think that's true. You know, in America, we have different types of models. They're mostly a deficit emphasis model, meaning like if something's wrong, they try to fix that rather than moving the child forward in what they're good at. Um, Unless you get into a gifted program, and then they're more supportive with moving kids forward and where their intellect is. The standard public schools, they have a lot of different public schools, but they're all pretty much that same model. So we tried a lot of different schools. And then, like Jordan said, in third grade, we went to a STEAM model, which was focusing on science, technology, math, and the arts. And that model gave you a computer, and that was a huge like
like
leg up for him, because he had the technology to express himself. So finally people were understanding, or educators were understanding that he did have something to say, and he was pretty bright. So then from that point he was identified as gifted, because that teacher, you know,
the teacher who I wrote the book under.
well, no, the teacher before that, when he first came in with the computer, recommended him to be tested for gifted. And that's when everything kind of flipped. So they started looking at him from having autism, from a student with autism that needed certain interventions, to a student that was gifted that needed different supports, or you could look at them differently. Unfortunately, that school did not have a lot of extra things for gifted, and he didn't experience that support of extra education until he went to what was called middle school, which would be the next section of school here in America.
Mhm.
And so at that point, a lot of times they move you to a larger school.
Yeah, the schools do tend to get bigger as the education goes on, is another thing, which is troubling for especially students on the spectrum, um, and with other disabilities, just because it's more difficult to function in larger classrooms and in larger spaces, and it can be very overwhelming. And more people creates more opportunities for bullying and all that sort of thing. So middle school was not a proposition that I, as a fifth grader, was looking forward to at all. Um, but thankfully, we were able to find a school outside the public school system called Bridges Academy, uh, which is a school which has a different type of education model. As my mom mentioned earlier, there's the public schools in the U.S. tend to focus more on the deficits that students have and try to get them all more or less to the same place on even footing. Uh, because, some people, if you're interested in something, it's very hard to get ahead in that subject and accelerate. And if you absolutely despise a subject, you are forced to do it until you catch up, essentially. Um, Whereas at a school like Bridges Academy, they're more focused on the interests of the students, and pushing them ahead in those interests. So, and also the other thing they do is they do everything they can to keep stress out of the school. There's almost no homework until high school. So for me, there was almost no homework. Uh, High school's the part that comes after middle school for those not familiar with the weird US terminology. Um,
There was no grades at that level either. So
yeah, no
there's no,
grades, no homework.
so it really doesn't, you don't have that competitive ness of, you know, getting, getting a good grade, or it's really all about the learning. And this was a private school, so this had to be funded. And then in America, what you can do is if you can show that your student, your child needs that different type of education, then you can fight the school district to pay for it. So it does put a lot of extra stress on the families because you do have to pay for that extra um, education. It's not free, and it's until you can prove that the child needs it. So it puts a lot of stress on the family financially to get an education, which you would think everyone should be entitled to the correct education, not the best education, but the education that's appropriate for you. And when you have a child that's gifted and with some disabilities or differences, then you really do need a different setting. And so the smaller setting at that school, the focus on high interest things, no grades, it's just really setting the child up to be in an environment where they can't wait to get to school, and the relationships are very important. The teachers are more like friends.
You're only supposed to refer to the teachers by their first names.
So that environment and that community again, and creating those relationships where you really see the students and what they're interested in really made the difference for Jordan. So being in that environment, he was able to access the curriculum basically for the first time. And what happened was he then started to radically accelerate even outside of school, because when he was free to learn whatever he wanted and he didn't have any grades and he didn't have any homework, he could just go crazy learning whatever he wanted to. So we saw a very different student, I mean, like child, where in the public school, he was just trudging through, trying to just do what he needed to until the end of the day. In this model of school, he couldn't wait to go to school. He was learning everything outside of school. He was watching podcasts and watching videos and learning things that weren't even being taught in school. And so that really started to show the true essence of his learning and his who he was to us as parents, and then we could support what he was interested in.
Yeah. So in did I find out about it in seventh or eighth grade? Seventh grade, right?
Sixth grade, you found out about that program, and then
Really?
yeah, and then
That's okay.
I think in
Um,
seventh grade you started working towards it. The summer of seventh grade, you really went for
regardless,
it.
during my time in middle school, I found out about a program at a university in LA, though there are several of them throughout the US, which would allow students as young as, is it 11 or 12?
11.
11. I was not 11 at this point, but it would allow students as young as 11 to go straight to college, skip all of the school that's between them and university.
Which would be called high school. So there's 4 years of high school.
For me, it was 4 years. If you're 11, it's a lot more.
No, oh yeah, but
But
high
yes,
school is 4 years long.
for me, I would have skipped 4 years and gone to university from middle school, which is unorthodox.
So you're 13 when you leave middle school. So you graduate, it's called eighth grade. So he graduated eighth grade from this strength-based model school, Bridges Academy, that was a private school, and went into the university system.
hmm and the way I was able to do that was a lot of studying outside of school, which I was able to do thanks to the lack of homework. Because if I was doing homework the whole time, I would have just been spending all my time on assignments that the teacher gave rather than working outside of class to prepare for the standardized tests that determine, whether your aptitude for college. And such. Um, so I spent a lot of time studying that outside of school. Uh, and the day came where I took the tests, and I did well on them, well enough to get into uh, the sorry, well enough to get into the program. And then from there, uh, there's another thing you have to do in order to get in. You have to take the tests, and then you have to participate in 3 classes the summer before the next semester starts, uh, with a bunch of other potential students. And they evaluate how well you do there and determine whether you should get into the program. Uh, and that's really more of a social evaluation and an emotional evaluation rather than uh, a academic evaluation. It's more an evaluation of maturity. Uh, but a huge part of that was this little cohorting system, this process of having everyone kind of meet up and bond over the summer, set me up really well with a group of friends who I could relate to, and who I bonded very quickly with over the course of 60 days because we were all essentially doing the hardest work we'd ever done at that point, college level work. Um, so that was a huge part of the program for me was meeting these people who would be my friends for the next few years. Thankfully, I got in, and a lot of my friends got in as well from the summer. And so for the next 5 years, would have been 4 years, but I decided to take an extra year to pursue a math minor. For the next 5 years, I was in university between ages 14 and 19, pursuing a major in physics. And that was great. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a second.
I just
And
want to go back for 1 minute. So I think the important thing is that when Jordan was in middle school in that strength-based model, he had to make a decision. He made a decision that he was really interested in physics, and that was his thing. And so then once he focused on the physics and had like a target, the gifted, it's amazing because the gifted profile, once they figure out what they're interested in, they just go for it. And he was able to, he asked us for an extra tutor where he had tutors his whole life, but this tutor was more of a mentor. It wasn't someone that was pulling him up in some subject. It was someone that was accelerating him in a subject. So it was a one-on-one that could go at his pace with the interest in the subject that he was interested in. And because he had, because we knew he needed to move his math skills up in order to get into college at that age, we focused on math. He didn't need to bring the other subjects up. He just needed math because he hadn't been exposed to that type of math. So we got a tutor, and the tutor started working with him. And because the tutor was writing out the math, he was able to go extremely fast.
I
So,
had not been a particularly great student in any math class prior to this. I never took notes in math, and I never did particularly well on assignments or exams.
so there was a big piece of the writing with the math, but we had no idea that he had a math mind, but he didn't have a math hand. So once we just brought this tutor in that was not remediating him, but accelerating him, he was able to do an entire year of math in 3 weeks. So that was something as from a parent's point of view where we were just like, how could that be possible? Because we had never seen that type of like mind, or we never saw that before. He was given the tools of having it go at his own pace and having the assistance of someone writing it out. So that was unlocking some of the giftedness. And then once he had that support, he was then able to figure out how to, take notes by himself with an iPad. And, we put in tools where he could, he only worked with this tutor for about 4.5, 5 months to get ready for that other program. And then he was able to take the notes, and we figured out that that was a problem and he needed that support. So this is another part of the gifted profile. These kids or gifted people are able to jump into a subject and learn extremely fast or get very proficient at it. And so I don't, unless you're educated as an educator in what they have and what they can do, it's kind of daunting. And I think constantly he was, you know, teachers were going, how can that be? He must be cheating, or something like that. So you really have to kind of understand that part of the gifted, brain or the gifted abilities. And so for him to be, again, in a setting with other students that were like him was really supportive and wonderful, because building that community is a very big part of supporting the emotional needs of the gifted, because they need to be around other people like them that think like that. They can learn 5 instruments or 6 foreign languages very quickly, and not just be, how do you do that? You're just like around your people, you find your people.
Yeah. Uh, and then kind of the conclusion of this story, as much as it has one, I'm still going,
Well,
is
getting into the college setting was, that particular model was the radically accelerated model. Anytime you
right.
would jump over 4 years of school, it's considered radically acceleration, not just accelerated model.
Yeah. So 3 education models at this point. Um, and like I said, the conclusion of the story now is I recently got into a PhD program where I'm pursuing my doctorate in astrophysics at West Virginia University. So there you go. I think I think it worked. Um,
So I think you're still radically accelerated because you're 19.
yes, I would say.
So
Though, I mean, at this point, uh, it's so vastly different from uh, what most people would consider school that it's hard to classify a PhD program. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. Um, so let's go back and kind of analyze this story and see what we can learn from it. Uh, the first thing that I want to say, because I think it's probably one of the most important points in this talk, is like I said earlier, a lot of these problems that students can have, especially at an early age, can be very difficult to identify. Teachers had no idea that I had difficulty handwriting, and that's why my performance in school was so poor for a long time, until I was given the appropriate, what we call assistive technology, until I was given a laptop in this case, and showed that I was, in fact, able to write in here. I just wasn't able to write out here. Uh, so, one of the key points I want to take away from this is that you have to look for these signs and really try to identify what the root cause of a student's poor performance might be, because you might be looking at someone, who could radically accelerate. Honestly, I think anyone can radically accelerate given the right tools and the right environment. Um, but that's just me. Uh, so that's kind of one of the most important things I want to take away from this. Beyond that, I would say Bridges Academy, there's lessons to be learned there. Giving students, first of all, taking away a lot of the stress and the expectations and the rigid structures of authority from a school, and allowing students to pursue what they're interested in. Giving students that freedom can really make them, it can be life-changing. Uh, Leaning into a student's interests is one of the most important things I think an educator can do, and encouraging them to pursue what they're interested in, because they're going to get ahead in it if they're interested in it. And yeah. Uh,
I think it's the work of Ross Green, I believe that's the educator, who says he doesn't really believe that students don't want to learn. So when you're a mom or an educator, if you're looking at your child as it's not that they're lazy or they don't want to learn, it's that something is preventing them from accessing the learning, or is maybe there's an environment where the teacher isn't supporting them or a good fit for them. Because you want to look at your child as someone that really does want to learn, and maybe there's something that's in the way. And I believe that it's also important, if they're having issues in school or they're not happy, that you're supportive of them. You're not angry and agreeing with the teacher right off the bat. You're looking deeper into what might be a problem, and you're giving them, the support and the love, and you're creating the relationship with them so that they're not feeling that they're alone. And even if they're just very smart and they just have a problem with that teacher, you help them to find ways to be successful, because you want to feel successful in whatever you're doing. If you're interested in math and they're making you do English all of the time, or studying the language all the time, and you're frustrated, you want to try to find things that are going to help your child feel successful. So if they're really good in math, you want to do math outside of your house, outside of the school, so that you can have that relationship with your child where they're feeling like they're successful. If they're not getting it in the school environment, you just want to keep building their confidence and your relationship, and letting them feel like they're not alone. Because in the gifted profile, these are very intelligent students, and they can get very depressed, and they can feel very lonely because they're maybe seeing things or learning things that are different or higher achieving than their peers. And so they can feel like they can't really relate to those peers until they find other peers that are like them, that think the same way. So it's really important to try to find them an environment or a community where they can feel like they are like the people around them, not different, or not understood or seen, or unsuccessful.
And more on that point, uh, I think something that really worked for me that I think ought to be replicated elsewhere the early entrance program is the program that allowed me to skip high school and go to college. Something that really worked for me in the early entrance program was this cohorting system of getting students and kind of putting them together in these classes that are pretty difficult, and the friendships that bloom just by virtue of doing something hard that you've never done before with a group of people you've never met before. Uh, I think that's so hugely important, especially in college, where it can be very difficult these days to make new friends. Because if you're taking a class with someone in college, normally you're going to know them for this class, and then odds are you're probably never going to have a class with them again. Whereas in this case, all of the classes, we shared all of the classes for that summer, and then for the following year, once we all got in, uh, we shared a lot of classes as well. So I think that's a hugely important point, is being able to kind of put people together in the same classes who are friends, uh, and let them work together, let them study together, and form a tight-knit group, uh, like I did there. Because, I'm still friends with these people today, even having not taken classes with them for years at this point. Um,
But having that formal, that was a type of model, and having that formal environment where they had team building, they had peer review, where they were reading each other's papers, they learned how to study together, and they had other things like board games and things like that they did socially. So it really bonded these individuals together, these students together, so that they had friendships and they had peer support And again, that's so important when you're building that community and you're building a community for success. It's a collaborative model. It is not a competitive model. So you're not competing with that person for, a better grade in a class. It's really about supporting each other to do well and having that positive environment where, it's not like I want to get a better grade than you get. And also, I think the whole grading system um, stops gifted people from reaching their potential. Because once you reach that A, you're like, oh, I got the A. And I think most gifted individuals are not really going for the grade. They're going for
Education.
the education and the learning. They really want to learn more than they want the grade. And the grade, when you get to a point where you realize, getting a grade is really limiting because you're only working towards the grade in the class. You're not really working towards your potential. And we really want to create environments where students are cheered on by their fellow, friends and students and cohorts to do the best that they can possibly do in any field and beyond, because that's where we're really, hoping that the gifted community is going to go beyond and find new things and be innovative. And that's where change really, really happens, not competing with the students in your class for grades.
And more on grades in particular, because this has been a recurring theme, is grades can also be incredibly destructive for gifted students in ways other than limiting them when they excel. Uh, I struggled with math for a very long time because of my dysgraphia. I never got particularly great grades in math. And as a result, I internalized this idea that I wasn't good at math. There was a point where I was just hesitant. I was hesitating about pursuing physics because I thought to myself, physics is almost entirely math, and I'm not good at math. I could have robbed myself of my dream career because of a B rather than an A. Um, so this has been kind of a recurring thing is students, especially gifted students, can be limited severely in certain ways that can completely fly under the radar. And when a grade is handed out that says you're less than equal to this task, you're not good at this particular subject, it totally disincentivizes the student from trying hard to learn that subject and fostering an interest in that subject. So I think grades have to be treated with extreme caution. You can't just assign those willy-nilly based on the number that people score on tests. Uh, that has to be something that is discussed and handled with care, because right now, especially in the US, it's really not. It's not handled tactfully in a lot of cases, and I think it's hurting millions of students, not just gifted students, everyone, uh, every year.
Yeah, your grade might not be the thing that we're feeling and looking at right now is your grade might not really reflect your potential. And it could actually, if you don't have, let's say, a perfect grade point average, it's so competitive to get into different schools. And the process of the admissions process is very, very stressful, and it's not really conducive to students following their dreams and really focusing on what they know. It's really too competitive, I think.
Yeah. Um, all right. What else is there to say?
I think we can talk about what would your advice be for gifted students, I think, in following their, like, what they want to do maybe,
Right.
or
So as far as personal lessons go, these are lessons that helped me, uh, and they might be helpful to other gifted students. They might not. Um, it just depends, I think, student by student. Uh, for a long time, I was kind of afraid to be outside the box. I don't know if that expression will translate well, but I was afraid to be different. I was afraid to operate in unorthodox ways. Um, so I think a huge piece of advice that I would have for students and for teachers, you can just take this and imagine yourself watching a student doing this. Don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid to do things in different ways. Uh, I had this great opportunity uh, 2 years into my university, 2 years into my bachelor's degree. I got the chance to live away from home for a while and pursue an internship at a university called Vanderbilt University, which was so great for me because it was an internship for students on the spectrum like me. And I it completely changed my whole perspective on autism because here I was with a group of people who did things how I wanted to do them, but never could because I was afraid, essentially. So I think it's very freeing to just understand that if you want to do something and it's so broad because it applies to every aspect of life, not just education. So it's the phrasing is a little vague, but I think it'll ring true. If you want to do something in a way that's not typical, but you think will work for you, don't be afraid to do that. If you want to be educated in a way that's not typical for you, don't be afraid to be educated, or rather, in a way that's not typical for other people. Don't be afraid to, because if it works, then you've taken your education into your own hands, and you've set yourself up for success. Uh, I would also say advice to other students, uh, kind of expanding on that. Education, it is you do go to school to get education, and so it can feel like education is up to other people. It's up to school administrators and politicians and teachers in order to educate you. Education is up to you. Uh, you can always learn more, and so it has to be if you have that internal motivation, and everyone does in a certain way, um, education is up to you, and you can always pursue it in your own way, uh, given the right environment. So that's probably my two biggest pieces of advice for gifted students is just don't be afraid to be who you are and don't be afraid to take your education into your own hands. If the mainstream system is not working for you. Uh, what else have we got?
I think that from the mom's perspective, having a gifted child, every gifted child's probably different. So I would just say, when you see things that are particularly, I mean, I would say, I was seeing things that were just extraordinary. And Jordan's language was way ahead in his situation. And he was using words that were like very different and very, like someone that was much more educated and higher, at 2 and 3 years old when he was speaking, he was using words that I wasn't using. And I was just amazed that how did he know these words? It was just strange. And he was doing things that were very innovative and creative. And so I just found that if you lean into the curiosity of the child and support them and, smile and love them and go with their ideas so that they know that they're on the right track, it will then promote them to keep going. Where if were to shame them or shh, no, don't do that, then they're going to stop. So I think as a parent, you want to put them in environments where they're safe and where they can explore and be curious and grow. And some of the odd behaviors that Jordan was doing as a child could have been looked at as something that was autistic, but I feel that, the brain development in a gifted individual is different, and they are making connections developmentally at a different age. And I found that I was just very curious, like a scientist with him. He was very interested in light. He was very interested in reflections and how things made things different. And so that I think was not an autistic quality, but a gifted quality of a brain putting things together as the way the world works. And so when you're looking at these younger children that are gifted before they're tested in the States, or they're tested in second grade, which is I think age 7, but I could see that something was very different and exceptional in Jordan at 2 and 3 years old, but there wasn't anyone telling me, oh, he's gifted. So I think as a parent, you need to just like support them and let them be nurtured so that they start to have the confidence in being successful and following that curiosity to where they're going to go into that innovative place where it's okay to think different or to kind of come up with different ideas. And once again, the relationship is so important that your child is supported and that you are exposing them. It's very important that you expose them to the things that they're interested in so that they can keep learning, outside of school, not just in school. If they're interested in stars, like he was interested in space, you do whatever you can to keep nurturing that education, because they might not be teaching it in school, and he needs, a gifted child needs to go on their trajectory. They need to kind of follow what they're interested in, because they're not going to be getting enough of that in the school setting. Even in gifted settings, I think you need to have a professor or a teacher or a mentor outside of school that can keep, letting them grow in that, so that they're satisfied with the learning, and it goes at their pace. It really needs to go at their pace. Their pace may be very different than the setting in the classroom.